Good morning to all esteemed professors, scientists, and participants present here. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 31st Technical Talk Series titled Transtech Talk Series, organized by KSST National Transportation Planning and Research Center, NATPAC. Through this Technical Talk Series, we aim to provide a platform for experts in the field of transportation engineering to share their knowledge and expertise with us. These talks will offer insights into the latest developments, emerging trends, and cutting edge technologies in transportation engineering. I would like to express my gratitude to all of you for joining us today. Today, we have an exceptional speaker with us, Dr. Milad Haghani, who will be sharing his valuable insights on the topic Progress in Crowd Science, a Dissenting Voice. Before we begin, I would like to invite Dr. Sabida Ennam, Senior Scientist at NATPAC, to deliver the welcome. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Jita. Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to the 31st edition of Transtech Talk series. The talk series organized by National Transportation Planning and Research Center, NATPAC. NATPAC, an institute under the Kerala State Council for Science, Technology and Environment, Government of Kerala, is a premier research and consultancy organization in the field of traffic and transportation. Our mission is to bridge the gap between research and practice, ensuring that innovative solutions are effectively translated to real-world applications. To promote the exchange of cutting-edge ideas and advancements in the transportation sector, NATPAC launched the Transtech Talk series. This initiative brings together a diverse audience, including academicians, scientists, government officials, research scholars, and students from across the country who share a common interest in transportation. Since its launch in February 2023, with an insightful inaugural talk by Professor Srinivas S. Pulgurta from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, the series has featured several distinguished speakers from both academia and industry. Each session has contributed a vibrant exchange of knowledge and deepened our understanding of recent technological advancements in traffic and transportation. Today, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Milad Haghani from the University of Melbourne, who will deliver a talk on the topic Progress in Crowd Science, a Dissenting Voice, a topic of great relevance due to recent crowd-related disasters and emerging research in this domain. On behalf of NATPAC, we extend a warm welcome to Dr. Milad Haghani and express our sincere appreciation for accepting our invitation. Thank you, sir. And also, I extend a heartfelt welcome to all participants present today, including the professors and faculty members from various engineering colleges and research institutions, officials from the government departments, research scholars, students, and our own colleagues from NATPAC. We look forward to an enriching session and engaging discussions. Following the talk, you are encouraged to share your questions in the chat box or unmute yourself to participate in a meaningful dialogue with our speaker. Thank you once again for joining us and welcome you all to today's session. Thank you.
Next, I would like to invite Srimati Veena KS, scientist at NATPAC, to introduce our esteemed speaker. Over to you.
Milad Haghani is an associate professor and principal fellow at the University of Melbourne, where he leads geospatial transport planning at the Centre for Spatial Data Infrastructures and Land Administration. He is a former Australian Research Council DECRA Fellow. He is the chair and founder of Crowd Safety Summit, a biennial event dedicated to advancing research and best practices in crowd safety. He is on the editorial board of Transportation Research, Part C. Haghani has authored more than 110 scholarly publications and has been published in leading journals, including the Science magazine. He is consistently listed among the top 0.05% of scientists globally. He brings extensive teaching experience in transport and safety, including his signature course, Human Factors in Transport, as well as international short courses for professionals in crowd and road safety. He regularly advises major venues and municipalities across Australia for their major events and has served as an expert witness in legal disputes involving public safety. As a subject matter expert in transport and public safety, he is a frequent media commentator and contributor to national and international news outlets. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this introduction and for the invitation to be with you again. And greetings to you in beautiful India. This invitation, I assume it follows the recent visit that I had to Bangalore to attend the conference on sustainable transportation. And the gracious welcome and invitation that you have extended to me is just a reflection of the warm welcome that I received during my stay. My gratitude to you, and I hope that the time that you're spending to join this meeting today is going to be worthwhile for you. As you mentioned in the introduction, my name is Milad Haghani, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the latest on crowd science and the past of crowd science, what we have got right, what we haven't got right. So hopefully by the end of it, you will have a better idea of where the field is headed and where it has gone wrong, and what we should do in order to make this science serve the purpose of keeping people safe in real world environments, as opposed to being just science on the paper. I might just attempt to share my screen for a second and focus on making that, getting that right, and then I will be with you, because this is a platform I do not usually use for my talks, so I need to get the hang of it. Let me just make sure that this is working. I assume that you can see the slides now.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
That's excellent. So I'm going to close this, just focus on the content on the screen. Okay, excellent. So I got a lot to cover, and for that reason, I'm going to skip any introduction about myself. However, it would be remiss of me to not introduce the institute that I am based in, and I'm in right at this second. As you mentioned, I am an associate professor of urban resilience and mobility at the University of Melbourne, and within this university, in the Faculty of Engineering and IT, I am based at Center for Should I continue? Yep. I am based at the Center for Spatial Data, Infrastructure and Land Administration, which is a multidisciplinary research center that is focused on delivering tech and research-focused solutions for urban development, sustainable urban development, and safe urban settings. It is focused on several aspects of teaching, research, engagement, and operations, and we have a very large footprint across all areas of the globe, including Middle East, Southeast Asia, and we provide tech and research and teaching solutions in all of those regions. As you mentioned kindly in your introduction, I'm today going to be talking about progress in crowd science, and you will see that I will be critical of some of the previous approaches in the science, and I will be talking to you about emerging trends and where we should head it in order to make this science more meaningful and more practical. When we talk about crowd science, we have safety of people in mind. So it is important to understand that safety and risk in this concept are intertwined. You cannot mitigate risk without understanding where risk comes from. And this is what I call the epidemiology of risk. Where is the risk distributed? How is the risk distributed over time? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? And how it is changing? For that reason, we have started a major campaign since a few years ago in order to understand the epidemiology of crowd risk across the globe. And for that reason, we have had to develop databases that would quantify the distribution of the risk for us across time and geographical regions, and based on different forms of risk. So we have differentiated 3 key forms of risk affecting crowded spaces and the safety of people in crowded settings. That includes the risk of terror attacks, the risk of crowd crushes, and the risk of extreme weather conditions. The terror attacks and extreme weather conditions are external factors that would affect the safety of people. However, crowd crushes usually emerge from the within dynamics of the crowd from within. We have seen that the distribution of these different types of risk across the globe are not equal. Where the terror attacks are concentrated are not necessarily where crowd crushes are concentrated or where extreme weather conditions are affecting mass gatherings and large events. So they all require their own tailored solutions and their own understanding. Two of these databases have already been published in open source publications. The third one on terror attacks and vehicle ramming attacks against crowds are coming soon. What have these epidemiology studies told us? What have I learned over the years from studying the distribution of crowd crushes across the globe, for example? They tell us many trends and factors that would be essential in order for us to mitigate the risk. For example, they have told us the number of people who are dying in crowd crushes around the world are significantly increasing. We have developed these databases by scouring the news, the media coverage of these crowd crushes around the world, as we did not have any other way of obtaining a source of information. Now this database is being regarded as a standard database for understanding how many past crowd crushes have occurred in the world and how many people have got injured and have died. And for that, we have relied on news sources and on multiple occasions on the scouring of multiple sources to get these data from. Once the database is complete, it has shown us that not only are the numbers increasing, but also the nature of crowd crushes that are happening around the world, they are also changing. If you look at the composition of the breakdown of the types of crowd crushes in different settings around the world in the years 2000, 2004, 2005, you see that there is a very large portion dedicated to sport and entertainment events. The share of sport and entertainment events over the last few decades, however, have decreased, and instead of that, two types of crowd crushes, two types of settings have taken over: religious mass gatherings and charity mass gatherings, settings where people are being handed free goods, food, the humanitarian distribution of food and commodities and things that people need. So these have become the emerging sources, the emerging settings where people are increasingly dying around the world in crowd crushes. And this is cause for concern. As I mentioned, we see increasing incidents of people dying in humanitarian distribution of food in the Middle East, in Africa, even in Southeast Asia. That is something that would have gone hidden if we had not put together this risk epidemiology database. That is the significance of having this comprehensive database that would signal to the emerging trends, to the emerging threats in a context. Also, we are seeing that the number of vehicle ramming attacks across the globe, they are also increasing. We have had multiple cases since the beginning of this year, and we have identified that not all these cases are necessarily acts of terrorism. These incidents happen due to a variety of reasons. Some of them are terrorism related. Some of them are just the result of a spontaneous road rage. Some of them are a result of grievances. Some of them are linked to mental health issues. So people around the world are dying as a result of vehicles ramming into the crowd for a variety of reasons. And we have identified that it's a misconception that every vehicle ramming attack is an act of terrorism. Therefore, if a country does not have a high level of terror attack, does not mean that they are immune to the risk of vehicle rammings in mass gatherings. And this is an important thing that we need to bear in mind, that there is no correlation necessarily between the level of terrorism threat and the likelihood of a vehicle ramming attack in a city or country. These can happen for a variety of reasons according to our data. In terms of crowd crushes and in terms of their distribution around the world, we have seen that there are hotspots. South and West Africa, Middle East, and unfortunately India, they are identified as hotspots for the occurrence of crowd crushes. These are where the most crowd crushes have happened in the past. Of course, The concentration of population and the density of urban settings is a factor in these occurrences. Where you have more people, where you have busier train stations, where you have more people attending a mass gathering, obviously there is a higher likelihood of a crowd crush happening. However, what we are arguing is that this is no reason for us to accept the occurrence of crowd crushes as an inevitability in mass gatherings. Doesn't matter whether we are talking about India, China, with hundreds of millions of populations, a billion plus population, we can still be taking measures proportional to the risk in order to mitigate the risk of crowd crushes. And hopefully the talk that I'm giving would give you a blueprint of how the risk can be mitigated. What kind of instruments, what kind of measures in our arsenal do we have in order to mitigate the risk? As I mentioned, the occurrence of crowd crushes, particularly in India, have become a cause for concern. We have seen recent cases in Bangalore, prior to that in multiple religious gatherings at temples, and prior to that also in recent Kumbh Mela festival, we have seen multiple occurrences of crowd crushes that have resulted in the death of innocent people. We are arguing that the frequent occurrence is no reason to accept these deaths as inevitability and as something that we should accept. Similar to road fatalities that we deem preventable, by all measures, we think that crowd crushes are also preventable and measures need to be taken in order to prevent them. In addition to the fact that there are hotspots in terms of the risk of crowd crushes, we also need to pay attention that the absence of a previous crowd crush in a city or a country does not guarantee that that city or country is immune from these risks. A very prime example of this is the crowd crush that occurred in 2022 in Seoul, South Korea, where more than 150 people died. If you look at the history of crowd crushes, there is barely anything like this in the city of Seoul or in entire South Korea. That means that the lack of precedent for the occurrence of these tragedies does not necessarily mean that you can be complacent and do not plan for mass gatherings properly. It does not mean that these crowd crushes are not going to happen in a city where there has not been any event like that. It was after the 2022 crowd crush that I decided to start an initiative called Crowd Safety Summit. I had a realization that despite our best efforts in the scientific community to address crowd safety issues, these incidents are still happening around the world and they are still happening at an increasing rate. So I thought that maybe it is the case that our efforts are not necessarily perfectly linked, to the risk mitigations that we need to implement. So I decided to come up with an initiative where I can have scientists, practitioners, technology innovators to have a shared platform come together and to discuss the latest developments, their needs. And this is when I came up with the notion of Crowd Safety Summit. The first one was in 2023 in Sydney. It was supposed to be a one-off event, but it was so welcomed and so appreciated by the scientific as well as the practitioner community that at the end of the event, I promised to hold the event every 2 years. In 2025, a few months before, we had the second summit in South Korea, and it was very successful. It was also deemed as transformative, and it was attended by many government officials, and hopefully it has improved the state of crowd safety knowledge and practice in the Republic of South Korea as well. We had the opportunity to have some of your best scientists, Dr. Ashish Verma and Professor Ashish Verma and Professor Meghna Verma, to be there as two of my keynote speakers. And if it is of any relevance, it was decided at the end of this summit that the 2027 one is going to be held in India, in the beautiful city of Bangalore. Hopefully that would give us an opportunity to have an extended version of these dialogues and these discussions in India in person for you, while I invite the top scientists and the top practitioners from across the globe and from India to share these insights for you guys. The event is usually free for attendance, and I invite you from 2 years in advance to be there with us at the Indian Institute of Science and to attend this wonderful initiative and to contribute to the discussions that will ensue. I also teach to practitioners courses on crowd safety, and that has also given me perspectives on what practitioners actually need. This is how I formulate my research usually. I look at what discussions take place during my courses with practitioners, and I usually try to tailor my research in a way that it would address the exact questions that practitioners have, the exact problems that they have during their operations. During the Crowd Safety Summit, we delivered this course for free to the young researchers and practitioners in South Korea. Hopefully, there will be an opportunity to repeat the same thing in Bangalore in 2027 when we have the Crowd Safety Summit. This would be in addition to the main event. And of course, hopefully I will have an opportunity. I think that you guys many of you are based in Kerala. So I think the distance is not that much. Hopefully that would give me an opportunity to visit the beautiful city of Kerala. I've heard many good things. Unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to visit. And I'm hoping that the next visit into 2027 would be an opportunity for that. So after the first Crowd Safety Summit, I introduced a new notion in crowd safety research and practice, and I called it the Swiss cheese model of crowd safety. And since then, it has become an accepted standard for crowd safety practice around the world. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go through the notion of crowd safety, Swiss cheese model of crowd safety, and explain to you what it means and how it contributes to mitigating the risk in crowded environments. Bear in mind that it's going to be a conceptual model. It's not necessarily a mathematical model. Mathematical models are part of it, but overall, the whole thing is a concept that, if implemented, I believe, is going to contribute to keeping people safe wherever these measures are implemented. So when we talk about keeping people safe in a crowded environment, we are talking about keeping them safe from risk. What do we do to keep risk away from our system? Our system in this case being a crowded space, a crowded environment. Well, we put risk prevention measures in place. However, it is very important to note that in risk mitigation, no single strategy, no single measure, no single method is going to be foolproof. There is no single solution that I can propose to you that would guarantee that the crowds in your environment, in your mass gathering, in your public event, in your train station are going to be safe from every source of risk every day. That is impossible. However, we can mitigate the risk. We can do modeling. We can do real-time operational control. We can do things like that. Every measure that we put in place is going to contribute to risk mitigation. However, that measure is going to also have holes in it. It's going to have flaws in it. It is important that we have other secondary and third and fourth layers of protection for the cases where one layer fails us so that the other layer can protect our system. And this is basically the notion of the Swiss cheese model of crowd safety. It is an analogy between these risk mitigation measures and layers of Swiss cheese where there are holes in each layer. Holes represent basically flaws and insufficiencies of that risk mitigation strategy. But the idea is that in order to prevent the risk from getting to our system, we only need one of these layers to stop the risk. So if the risk gets through one layer of protection, but gets stopped by the next layer of protection, then we are going to be fine. The risk is going to get close to our system, but that doesn't matter from the perspective of risk mitigation. As long as risk does not get exactly to your system and lead to a catastrophe, that's a successful outcome. And that is what we are arguing, that by increasing the layers of protection, you significantly can reduce the likelihood of these catastrophes. And of course, we can also take measures in order to reduce the number of holes in each layer and also make them smaller. That means that each layer is a better protection for the risk and is subject to less flaws and shortcomings. So what are the layers that I have envisioned for the Swiss cheese model of crowd safety? I have envisioned 5 layers. Different people might come up with different interpretations, but I think this is the way Swiss cheese model of crowd safety should be formulated. The first layer of protection is policy, legislation, and permits. The second level is pre-planning, risk assessment. The third level is real-time operational control. The fourth level is community preparedness. And the fifth level is incident response. So let me give you a quick overview before getting into individual layers of this model. So the idea is that you can prevent the risk at the level of policy and legislation by having requirements for permits in place that would not allow an unsafe event to go ahead. However, once the permit is obtained, then you need to have measures to do pre-planning, to simulate the event, to do risk assessment prior to anybody gathering in any space. You can do that. However, when you do that, that is done with the limited amount of information that you have at hand, with the limited amount of tools that you have. It can contribute to mitigating risk. However, it does not guarantee risk not happening. So you do this, but during the event, you also need to obtain real-time information from your crowd and monitor the crowd, just in case that your planning was not good enough, just in case that your legislation and permit requirement was not good enough to prevent or to stop an unsafe event. But let's assume that we have done all these 3 things. We have done regulation, we have done pre-planning, we have an operational control system, and you usually have that in a major crowded environment, such as Kumbamela. But still, risk gets through your system. When all these external layers of protection fail to protect the system, then it is the actions of people, the actions of the people involved within the crowd that can determine whether a catastrophe occurs or whether they can prevent the catastrophe right before it happening. And that is a very new thing that I have started in crowd safety, looking at the community and people as a protective layer for the people. That means building a community resilience for crowd safety. And I think, in fact, it's one of the strongest and most effective layers of protection for crowd safety. But if all these 4 layers fail and an incident happens, the quick response of emergency services still can mitigate the impact. Today, I'm going to base the talk on the assumption that we are trying to prevent any disaster. So I will only describe the first 4 layers and we'll leave this 5th one out of the scope, hoping that we never have to invoke this 5th layer. So let's start with policy and legislation. How can policy and legislation help mitigate the risk? The best demonstration of it is the current safety level that we see at the stadiums in the United Kingdom. If you look at the data, in the years around 1980s and 1990s, every few years there was a major crowd crush accident in one of the football stadiums in the United Kingdom. Nowadays, there is barely any. It is because of the fact that over those years, the UK government started taking notes from the occurrence of these events. They put together guidelines. They put together formal guidelines and permit requirements for their stadiums. And a match in the United Kingdom, a football match, cannot go ahead without showing adherence to those strict guidelines anymore. As a result, the occurrence of these catastrophes in football stadiums have significantly reduced over the recent years. The question would be, are these guidelines perfect? Are the numbers that you see for the requirements that these guidelines specify, are they necessarily scientific? Are they necessarily perfectly tuned? The answer is that they don't have to be. For as long as they give people a formal set of instructions and standards that they can observe, that they can place their risk assessment based on, that would have the effect that it is intended for. So guidelines can never be made perfect. The numbers in those guidelines, the specific requirements that they put in place, they are not necessarily 100% scientific, and they don't have to be necessarily 100% scientific. As long as they can differentiate between an unsafe practice, an unsafe event, and a safe practice and a safe event, that is all the outcome that you need. So they have proven previously effective in mitigating risks. When I was just a month ago in Bangalore to give this talk, one of the honorable members of parliament was present during my session. I mentioned the recent crowd crush event in Bangalore during the celebration of the championship of one of the local cricket teams. And it was mentioned, it is basically something that I am quoting, that event should have never happened because it had a very short notice prior to the parade, the celebration parade, and there was not enough time for risk assessment and for pre-planning. And that is how legislation and permit can stop a catastrophe. That if you do not have a permit, if you have not shown the required pre-planning and risk assessment, your event cannot go ahead. That means a catastrophe averted. But that means also the absence of that legislation, the absence of that layer of Swiss cheese, it means that it makes your system more vulnerable. That an event that is deemed objectively unsafe to go ahead, in the absence of such requirements, can go ahead and ultimately result in catastrophes. That's how one layer of Swiss cheese in and of itself can prevent catastrophes. These days, we are seeing that the government of United Kingdom is also becoming a pioneer in legislating for the betterment of safety in crowded venues, especially the new legislation called Martin's Law in the United Kingdom. That is a requirement for major venues to conduct thorough risk assessment, specifically for the threat of terrorism before every major event. This initiative is the work of one of the victims of Manchester Arena bombing after the Ariana Grande concert in the UK. One of the mothers of one of the victims started a campaign for about a decade advocating for venues in the United Kingdom to conduct risk assessment to mitigate the risk of terrorism in their venues. And after almost 10 years of campaigning, this legislation has eventually been passed, and now it is mandatory in the United Kingdom for every major venue, proportional to the size of the venue and to the size of event that they have, to conduct the specific risk assessments to mitigate the threat of a terror attack. The question would be, would this be effective in mitigating the risk? What about leaving this decision to venues to conduct their own risk assessment? If their venues are doing risk assessment out of their own goodwill for keeping crowds safe, do we necessarily need a legislative piece in place, a formal legislation? The answer is that when it comes to a specific threat of terrorism, the answer is yes. Having such kind of measures in place would act as the security posture of the environment. How an external factor, how an external party would perceive the vulnerability of that venue has direct bearing on the risk of terrorism. Basically, if I am to translate it in simple terms, if terrorists do see that there is a specific requirements for terrorism risk assessment, they would think twice before trying to attack a venue. That means increasing the security posture of a venue. And that is in and of itself is going to improve the security apparatus of these systems. Let's say that we have the best legislation and policies in place for our venues and for our mass gatherings. Is that going to be enough to keep our places safe, to keep our people safe in crowded spaces? Not necessarily. Despite all of that, you can obtain a permit, but you don't know how it's going to unfold during the day. In order to have a better idea of how the event is going to unfold, once you have the permit, you need to conduct a thorough risk assessment. And sometimes you need to do a thorough risk assessment in order to obtain that permit. So these are not necessarily sequential. This is just another layer of protection. But what tools do we have in order to complete these risk assessments? Usually we do our risk modeling based on simulation tools, simulation models. We simulate our event, we simulate the evacuation of the stadium, we simulate the movement of people in the arena, and then we estimate the amount of risk that we are facing. In doing so, the accuracy of the risk assessment that we undertake is going to be directly proportional to the accuracy of the model that we use for risk assessment. And that takes me to the issue of modeling. Where do these models come from? Usually from the work of people like myself and other colleagues around the world who are active in the domain of developing simulation models. However, I'm not happy to break it to you that many of the models that have been developed over the years in this space, for crowds, are actually inaccurate. There is one particular reason to it, and that is the fact that many of the models are actually things that we have borrowed from other systems, from things that are not necessarily movements of pedestrians and crowds. And we have tried to use those models for the movement of pedestrians and crowds, hoping that they would give us accurate results. Well, the reality is that they won't, because they are not tailored for these systems. We have a tendency to use models that have been developed for the movement of vehicular traffic flow. We have a tendency to use models that have been developed originally to simulate the motion of grains, to simulate the motion of particles, basically physical systems that are not related to humans. We also tend to use models that are meant to describe the motion of bodies of fluid and borrow them in order to simulate the movement of crowds. And worst of all, we use models that biologists have developed in order to describe the motions of herds of animals and groups of animals. I have argued in the past that none of these approaches have contributed anything to the field, because these systems are completely and vastly different from the systems consistent of a large number of humans on foot. Yes, when you look at the photos, when you look at the aerial photos, a large group of vehicles going through a bottleneck, it would remind you of a large group of people going through a narrow doorway. Yes, that is the level of analogy that you can take. But the dynamics of these two systems are significantly different. Unfortunately, there is not enough time for me to explain those differences, but I will leave it at that these differences are actually determinant of the predictions of these simulation models. So if these analogies do not hold at levels below the surface, then the predictions of these two models are going to be very, very different, and borrowing from one context to the other is not going to work. Similarly, you cannot borrow models that are meant to simulate the movements of particles, self-driven particles, and think that they would match the movements of humans in a crowded environment. Particles are fundamentally different from humans. Particles cannot think and make their own decisions. The movement of particles are governed exclusively by the laws of nature and by the laws of physics. Once you understand those laws, you can simulate these systems deterministically with 100% accuracy. But systems involving humans are fundamentally different. They are stochastic. There is no repetition of any event. You have 100 people in a venue and you want them to evacuate. You have those 100 people on another day, they make by and large different decisions, because humans make random decisions, have a stochasticity to their actions and behaviors. And therefore, it is not possible to simulate those systems based on the laws of physics. So that is another point of argument. I'm trying to get through this as fast as I can. Similar argument I have used for the use of fluid dynamics models for the simulating motions of crowds. That's quite outdated. It's not going to result in any accurate predictions. And the only reason people do it is that it's done by people, by scientists who are actually good at fluid dynamics. They are comfortable with these equations, and they think that just because they know these equations, they can make some tweaks to them and make them suitable for predicting motions of humans. One of the best reasonings that I have identified is this quote that is an admission to this practice, saying that our choice is primarily based on our expertise in classical fluid mechanics, and because of the fact that so that is an admission that their choice of methodology is just because they are familiar with the methodology, not because of the fact that there is any solid justification in transferring a methodology of fluid mechanics to describe the motions of pedestrian crowds. So these systems, they may look like humans from a surface level, but they do not necessarily represent systems of humans. That is why I started since 2015 a new approach in developing models, and that was developing models exclusively using data coming from human experiments. I have conducted hundreds of rounds of experiments with human crowds in laboratory conditions, in semi-laboratory conditions, in field settings, in order to understand dynamics of crowds by studying crowds and not by studying ants, not by studying mice, not by studying herds of sheep, and not by studying the movement of fluids or particles. I do not need to study those systems in order to understand dynamics of crowds. All I need to study is the crowd itself, and that is what I have done over the years. Hundreds of rounds of experiments, each experiment focusing on a different aspect of behavior. Sometimes the experiments focus on decision-making aspects of behavior. Sometimes the experiments focus on mechanical and physical aspects of their behavior. And as a result of these extensive experiments, I have developed a knowledge base and a rich set of data that has been adequate enough to be translated into a simulation model, and to train that simulation model to make sure that the parameters of that simulation model are fine-tuned in the correct way, and that the predictions of the model have some bearing on the reality. What I get from the model is not 100% different from what happens in reality if that system occurs in reality. So this is what we are talking about when we discuss the accuracy of these models. It is all about how you fine-tune these parameters, how you set these parameters. Basically, what values do you allocate to these parameters? Because you allocate the wrong values, your result, the result of your prediction it can be off by a factor of 1,000%. There is no limit how much your model can be off. It can be completely off in a way that it has no bearing on the reality. And that is what we are trying to prevent in our practice, to make sure that our models are grounded in reality and in data. And sometimes I show these things to people, but I warn them that, yes, this is a model that I think is accurate and I've spent a decade fine-tuning its parameters, but do not let me fool you by showing the animation. Animation does not mean anything in this context. It is all about the numbers and the results, the numerical values that you get from these simulation models that mean something. Over the years, I have used these models for a specific purpose also. Well, what do? People use it in order to understand how the infrastructure should look like. What is the required width of a bridge to handle the amount of huge crowd that is going to pass through it without risking a crowd crush. These are the things that you can use models for. However, past experience has shown that despite modeling benefits, tragedies can still occur. You can run relatively accurate models for your event, and still catastrophic outcomes happen when people actually gather in the environment. Why is that the case? Because when you're doing the modeling, even if your model is 100% accurate, the information at hand are not 100% complete and accurate. You model based on the amount of information that is available to you prior to the event. And that does not necessarily match reality. On the day of the event, things can differ, can diverge from the input parameters from the information that you had at the time of risk assessment. So what does that mean? That means that this second layer of Swiss cheese model, even though useful, it can fail you. Therefore, if you want the risk to not get to your system, the risk that is hovering over your system, waiting for vulnerabilities to get to your system and to cause a catastrophe, if you want to prevent it, then you need another layer of protection. And what could be the layer of protection then? That's putting in place adequate operational level control. Things that would allow you to have real-time information from the crowd, to have real-time data to sense the crowd and to predict the risk shortly before it's happening. At this stage, we forego anything that we have done at pre-planning, and we think that the risk might get through our system at any moment. And we look for vulnerabilities in real time, in minutes. Within minutes, we need to predict the next state, the state of the crowd based on what is unfolding in reality. And we have seen that governments around the world are welcoming and implementing these technologies, including the government of India, that implemented real-time crowd monitoring technology and many other aspects of real-time operation control during the latest Kumbh Mela festival. However, as I mentioned then, and as I'm mentioning now, even the implementation of these real-time control systems, they do not guarantee that our systems are not going to fail. As I mentioned, it's all about vulnerabilities in these protection layers. Nothing is perfect. Real-time monitoring using cameras and density estimation would 100% help us better react to risks that are developing within our crowd, but they do not guarantee risks from happening. So that is something that we need to bear in mind. A prime example of it happened just a few days ago in Sydney, where a large protest was taking place. People were going over a bridge, and all of a sudden, police decided that at the end of the bridge, there is a risk of a bottleneck and a crowd crush forming. And therefore, they sent thousands of text messages to the people on the bridge asking them to stop in order to prevent a crowd crush. Obviously, since then, it has started a political storm, people disputing that decision, thinking that it was politically motivated, things like that. But that aside, it just shows that how you can respond in real time in order to prevent a crowd crush. Nobody knows what would have happened had the police not taken that measure. But this is a demonstration of how real-time decisions need sometimes to be made when dealing with crowds using the best amount of information at hand, and not just necessarily rely on the fact that we have done risk assessment, we have done modeling, and our modeling has shown that we are going to be fine. That means that your system is going to fail, and then you're going to be taken by surprise. And then you will be asking, what happened? The modeling was fine, but what happened on the ground leading to the disaster? Then there will be a commissioner investigation and all of that, and then results will be that, okay, at the time that you need your modeling, your estimations, your assumptions were this, but in reality, the assumptions did not hold. And that is how the modeling, this outcome was different to what happened in real time. So we need to have these measures in place in order to prevent disasters right before they develop. And we have seen these things: failure to take actions, for example. Failure to take actions, similar to the fact that we think that this was a successful intervention by Sydney police in preventing a crowd disaster. We have had many examples where failure to take actions has resulted in disaster. The prime example of it is the infamous, deadly, tragic Travis Scott concert that resulted in the death of more than 10 people. As you can see, there are clear signs of distress and discomfort amongst the attendees of that concert. There were signals that the crowd crush was happening. Police was alerted to it. People were shouting, people were sending text messages to the police, people were calling emergency services, but failure to take actions to stop this concert resulted in the death of more than 10 people. This is the opposite example that I mentioned. In real time, you can make decisions that would save lives or result in catastrophic outcomes. Similar thing we have observed during the Itaewon disaster. If you look at the video footage from the Itaewon disaster, there are clear signals that in some of the areas, a disaster was unfolding. However, what I have argued is that based on the camera vision, you cannot necessarily identify where that disaster was unfolding, because a lot of the things that you see across the entire Itaewon area look the same, but only in one particular area, there is a risk of crowd crush. And that is the area where you can hear people screaming. And that is why I am arguing that the over-reliance of real-time monitoring on vision and video analytics is also a big hole in operational control. There are other signals that you need to collect from your crowd, including text messages, including social media, and any other aspect of information that you can get from your crowd. The over-reliance necessary exclusively on vision analytics is going to be imperfect, and there are cases that in the past that this has resulted in the death of many people as a result of the failure in identifying a developing risk. Well, we have been successful in covering 3 layers of Swiss cheese model. I think I have a few minutes to talk about the most important layer that I have been talking about, the last layer, the behavior of the community. Let's assume that despite all your best efforts as an organizer, as city authorities to keep people safe, you have put in place proper legislation. The organizers have done thorough risk assessment, modeling. You have put in place all sorts of technologies that could have potentially been implemented to monitor the crowd, but then people find themselves in a precarious situation, in a risky situation. Is there anything that people can do at those moments of crisis, to turn a disaster into a near miss, to avert a catastrophe? Well, my research has shown that yes, that's the case. I have numerous examples of it, how the actions that people take in a public event, in a mass emergency, during the time of crisis, can mitigate the risk, can mitigate the impact of the event, or can make it worse. Prime examples of it is in a recent public attack that took place in a shopping center in Sydney just a few years ago. I don't have time to explain it, but this is a clear case where actions of the community did contribute to mitigating the impact, the catastrophic impact that was unfolding. So there are many examples like that. That is why I started this notion of self-optimizing or self-regulating crowds. This is a new theory that I have been speaking about for at least last 5 years, and I have been explaining different dimensions, different aspects, what it means, how it works, and how it can save lives in reality. And I'll take you through it hopefully within a few minutes. Question would be that why is it that so far we have not been thinking about people as a layer of protection? My answer is that it's because of the outdated crowd psychology theories that have prevented us from looking at people in a crowd as rational entities that are capable of taking good decisions, of making good decisions, taking the right action. This is because of the outdated crowd psychology theories that are from 150 years ago, by saying things that people in crowd are impulsive, irrational, and cannot be relied upon. Things such as the theory that the psychologist, so-called psychologist Gustav Le Bon has perpetuated. Since then, we have come a long way, and we do not think that those theories hold true anymore. We have a very different perception of crowds, and we know that crowds can make decisions even in times of crisis. People within crowds are still capable of retaining knowledge, retaining training, and taking actions that basically would prevent a crowd disaster at the last minute of happening. But these outdated psychological theories, they have changed the narrative. If you look at the language of the media, when something happens, the media is very quick to label it as a crowd stampede. The direct implication of it, first of all, this stems from these outdated crowd psychology theories. And the direct implication of this type of language is that it puts the blame on the people that were involved in that disastrous event. That means that they did something irrational that would have that ultimately resulted in the death of people. That is often not the case. Almost in every case, there is another factor in place other than the actions of the people. Crowd disasters barely occur because people misbehave in a crowd. And I have taken issues with the language that is used in the academic area and also across the media. And these efforts have made some difference in how media these days refer to these events, at least in Australia now. Well, I talked about the Astroworld disaster. And again, one of the reasons that sometimes we do not communicate the risk to people, an unfolding risk to people, is by invoking these outdated crowd psychology theories. During the Astroworld tragedy, the police and organizers, they were informed that the crowd disaster was about to happen. But according to the public event, if you watch this documentary, the organizers didn't want to trigger a crowd panic. And as such, they did not stop the event. They thought that if they stop the event, there's going to be crowd panic. And as a result, they took no action. And the result of it was that 10 people died in a crowd crush. Another alternative scenario would have been to communicate this to the crowd. The artist himself could have communicated it, and everybody would have been saved. And we would not be talking about a tragedy during the Astroworld concert right at this time. That tragedy would have been averted by taking that action. So these days, instead of a traditional top-down approach in crowd science, I'm looking at a community-oriented bottom-up approach of how crowds can be trained in order to keep themselves safe in an environment. I have tested that using simulation models by modifying the behavior of people and showing how systems can become more efficient and more safe if we ask people to modify behavior a little bit in different directions. And what I have done recently is that I have put all of these hypotheses that I have driven from simulation models into test in actual laboratory experiments, where I start with a group of naive people showing performances in crowded spaces. Then little by little, I train them. I focus on a specific aspect of their behavior, and I give them a very simple instruction. They go back to the crowd, mix up with the crowd, and then by implementing that strategy, the system becomes a little bit more efficient. Then I add another 20% to the portion of people that are informed of that strategy, and the system becomes even more efficient. And when I get to the 100%, I'm dealing with a system that is significantly more efficient than the system of naive individuals. And I have tested that, and I have proven that there are many aspects of people behavior that you can modify with simple instructions, simple messaging, simple sentences, basically, to make these systems more efficient and more safe. And I have proven a range of these interventions that can be easily implemented in order to keep people safer in crowded environments. And once we realize that there are actions that can be done from the fabric of the community to keep crowds safer, then the question would be, how can we build resilience and robustness from the grassroots up, from the body of the community? And that is how I have got into this notion of crowd safety culture. How can the readiness and the resilience of a community with respect to crowd safety, how can it be measured? Once you can measure it, you can improve it. You can come up with interventions, and you can do before-after studies and see whether the community, as a result of those educational campaigns, for example, educational campaigns that can run in schools for 2 to 3 years, whether the community has become more resilient towards crowd safety risks. And for that, I have developed instruments, I have developed standardized scales that can measure objectively the preparedness of a community. It's called the crowd safety culture scale, and also another scale for terrorism preparedness, crowd terrorism preparedness scale. And I have tested that in Australia. And the next step of this research would be to administer that scale and that instrument across the globe and understand whether or not the score on crowd safety culture, the readiness of the community, correlates with the occurrence of crowd crushes. And if that is the case, that means that by asking community level readiness, you can have a perception of how likely it is that a crowd crush happens in a country. And then you can come up with targeted behavioral campaign strategies that would mitigate the risk, improve the crowd safety culture. And that is something that I think can significantly contribute to mitigating the risk of crowd crushes and any other form of crowd safety risk across the globe. There is an emerging area of this research, and that is basically the future of my research that I am presenting to you. I am hoping that by the time that I come back for the Crowd Safety Summit in 2027, I have results of this global research, including the Indian component of it, to present to you. That is basically what I had to talk about. I appreciate your time. I think we have 10 minutes or so for questions. I would love to hear what you guys think. And if there is anything I need to elaborate more on, I would be more than happy to.
Thank you, sir, for that excellent presentation. And that was very informative. And now this session is open for questions.
Hi, I'm Dr. Anila from NATPAC. I have a question regarding the field experiments or maybe the laboratory experiment that you have told that you have carried out human behavior studies within the lab, semi-lab and field. But when we know that when we are being monitored, people behave differently, right? So how did you account for that, or how that that was accounted for in your modeling part?
Thank you. Thank you for the
yeah.
question. It's a very extensive argument. Basically, it's a question I get every time I present this. The key answer to this is that people do not necessarily behave extensively differently in laboratory settings compared to non-laboratory settings. Yes, you can never have a laboratory experiment that is 100% representation of reality. However, the entire field of psychology has been built on these types of laboratory experiments. And time and again, we have shown that, and scientists other than myself have shown that things that you observe in reality, they can translate to great degrees to the behavior of people outside laboratories. In fact, people who come and participate in laboratory experiments, they go out of their way to be good participants, to listen to the instructions, and to give you what you need. If you give them an instruction, they listen, and I've dealt with thousands of people participating in these experiments. And they're always attentive. They always want to do the instructions exactly as you tell them. And if you tell them that just behave as you would do in a normal crowd emergency environment, they will really try to visualize it and to imagine a real emergency in order to give you the response that is close to reality. That is my impression of working with people. And by testing these things over and over across times, I do an experiment, I develop a model, and then I repeat that experiment several years later. And I realize that that model now predicts the new experiment, meaning that this population gave me something that is representative of the entire population. Otherwise, using this model, I would not have been able to replicate and predict the behavior of an entirely different sample 2 years apart. So these are the tests that we do to make sure that these patterns that we observe in semi-laboratory environments are not necessarily an artifact of the setting. And when I refer to this as a laboratory, it's a compromise basically between laboratory and field environments. We are talking about people actually interacting with one another. It's not a virtual reality thing. It's in terms of the realism level. It is a good compromise. It will allow me to observe the crowd, give them instructions, have a controlled environment, but also the interactions are real. To sum it up, I agree with your remarks, but it is not a concern that would convince us not to do this type of experiments. The knowledge that we get from it outweighs the smallest variations, laboratory reality variations that we can accept as a compromise.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So one more question, that is, maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure whether you're carrying out the experiment entirely in Australia, but when it comes to an Indian scenario, we can say, as an example, in the case of Kumbh Mela, we are having people from different demographic, socio-demographic backgrounds. There may be people who are highly maybe literate, and some may be illiterate, and their socio-demographics vary very it varies majorly. So in such a case, how how can we account for the behavioral changes in the crowd?
Thank you. Thank you. I think that is summed up by the notion of crowd safety culture. I don't think that crowd safety behavior is necessarily linked to age, gender, or nationality necessarily. That nationality could have something to do with it. But overall, these differences are captured by this notion of crowd safety culture. Some demographics, some groups could be more risk takers. Some groups could be less risk takers. Whether or not this is necessarily male or female, we don't know. Whether or not an Indian population would score differently in crowd safety culture compared to another population, I haven't tested it yet. But I think there are differences that we can capture in that sense. And once we capture these scales have different dimensions. Then we can tell that, for example, a population of Kumbh Mela festival goers, they score lower, this is hypothetical, on risk aversion compared to an average Indian population. Well, that means that, for example, that gives us something that they are willing to take risk in order to do the holy dip, for example. But their situational awareness is also less. That means something, that if you need to take interventions, you need to work on their situational awareness and risk aversion. It is a hypothetical. It is actually a male-female comparison that I have in front of me. But these kind of investigations could give you an idea of where you should target, what aspect of behavior you should exactly target in order to increase the community resilience. And this is something we're looking at. In terms of cross-cultural comparisons, we have done a number of experiments across different cultures. Recently, we did an experiment in Australia. We repeated that in Germany. We repeated that in Japan. We repeated that in China as well. And that included only walking aspects, the dynamics of people simply walking. What we observed was that there were differences, but there were more similarities than differences. So basically, we were not too much concerned about the dynamics of movements of a Japanese population compared to an Australian and Chinese population. I think a model of one can, by and large, explain the other with relatively good accuracy. So there are some aspects that would transfer across cultures, but there could be aspects that are significantly different. It's just a matter of identifying what transfers, what doesn't.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you.
If it is okay, can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Yeah. So when we consider a crowd, we know that when a crush happens, the density of the people or the crowd will be more. Can we use some kind of maybe thermal imaging or something to determine a threshold density and give some trigger warnings or something like that?
To determine a threshold density for crowd crushes?
Yes.
Yep. If you ask the threshold density for crowd crushes from 20 different experts around the world, you will get 20 different results. There are some of my colleagues that would not tolerate anything above 4 people per square meter. I absolutely do not think that crowd crushes happen at 4 people per square meter. Okay, I have had experiments where people were in the density of this experiment, for example, if I can get to it, 9 people per square meter, and it still wasn't a crowd crush. In my view, a crowd crush would not happen at anything lower than 8-9 people per square meter. But you ask people, their tolerance is 5 people per square meter. Yes, that number can be used for safety practice, but it doesn't mean that at 6 people per square meter, there's going to be a crowd crush. People are going to be extremely uncomfortable. Here, the density that you're seeing is near 8 or 7, or maybe at areas 9 people per square meter, and people are not dying. Okay, so people can be in a very dense environment and tolerate it. There are other factors. It's the persistence of that density, how long it persists and it lasts, and whether or not it's going to be a transient going to 8 or 9, or it's going to be a persistent one and it's going to have more people adding to it. These are all the factors. So the fact that the crowd gets to a level of density does not mean that crowd crush has necessarily happened. Anyway, to sum it up, I think my colleagues believe that 4 or 5 is the max. I don't think at 4 or 5 crowd crushes happen. It could be used as a rule of thumb for safe practice to make sure that crowd crushes won't happen. But in my view, the crowd's fluidity, the state that where you're not in charge of your movement and the crowd acts like a continuous body, I think that occurs at around 9 to 10 people per square meter.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you.
First of all, it was an exceptionally well-delivered presentation. I have a general question, like how do the approaches to risk modeling differ from mass gathering in a planned event, like you have discussed, sports, concerts, or religion events, and emergency situations like earthquakes or tsunamis?
Yeah, to risk assessment. A risk assessment of a sport event is probably the easiest thing, in my view, compared to to a religious gathering, for example. Religious gathering has all sorts of complexities. You don't know exactly how many people are coming. It's a vast area usually, and it's not a specific infrastructure that is built for hosting crowds. People have very high levels of motivation and emotionality. Their risk tolerance is high. They're happy to take risk in order to do the religious rituals that they need to do. It's a whole different kettle of fish, religious gatherings, compared to sport events. In sport events, if you know how many tickets you have sold, if you do a simulation modeling, and if you do that repeatedly, you are confident that you can repeat that into the future safely as well. But when it comes to religious gatherings, every gathering is unique. You never know how many people exactly would turn up, what type of emotional intensity they would carry, when a risk is going to emerge where. And that is really going to make the practice of safety significantly more difficult compared to an organized, structured event like a sport event.
Sir, I have asked how it differ from an emergency situation, like during an earthquake warning or tsunami warning, there will be a
What is different, the behavior of people or the risk assessment?
yeah, risk
Which
assessment.
one?
Between emergency situation and a planned situation. Like during a tsunami warning or earthquake warning, there will be a
Well, a risk assessment
crash.
means, I don't get that premise, that part of the question.
No,
A risk
how the
assessment would,
approaches are different. How the approaches are different for these two different situations.
for crowd crushes and emergency situations, you mean?
And a planned event like concerts or
A
sports.
plan would take into account, a thorough plan would have all of this. When you do risk assessment for an event. You assess for the risk of terrorism, what would happen if a terror attack happens, how long do we need to evacuate, all of that. But also you do risk assessment for the risk of crowd crush. That is all part of the risk assessment. When you run the model, obviously the parameters of running the model as a result of a terror attack are different to the parameters of modeling the possibility of a crowd crush. People are operating normally. The speed is at normal level. People are going to the direction as intended. In case of a terror attack, for example, I don't go to the tsunami because I don't have a setting for tsunami in mind. But let's say terror attack, the speed would increase. People would have only one destination in mind, and that is outside the venue, and all those things. So the parameters of simulation change, basically.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Sir, this is Dr. Praveen from NATPAC. Sir, this is a very informative presentation. Sir, I'd like to know whether, like, the events, like based on the religious events and also some other events, the behavior of people changes. And also, you have told that risk-taking behavior of people during religious events is much higher. But sir, if you compare such an event to that of a railway station, like for example, a train is coming up and in a couple of minutes the door might close, and then the crowd rush can happen. At that scenario,
I can't hear
is
that.
this entirely different?
Sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing the question, to be honest. I'm really sorry.
Okay, is it audible right now, sir?
It is better. If you could just repeat the main part of it, I can try.
Okay, sir, I was asking like whether during at a railway station also, like when the train comes up and those are closed, opened up, and there can be a chance of a mass crowd intensity, and also density goes up. Like maybe for a short time, but the thing is that the risk-taking behavior is entirely different from the probably from the religious event, because the people of different ages will be there, and the mobility aspect of these people will also be different. So in that scenario, like will these models be able to predict the catastrophe or something?
Dr. Ramisha, would it be possible to summarize the question for me? I think my connection might not be as good as yours. I'm not sure. But would it be possible, if you heard better than me, to summarize the question for me?
Sir, I think he might have asked that in a railway station, when the train comes, suddenly there will be a rush. Like the people will be getting out of the train, and to enter the train, there will be a rush, and it will be having sometimes kids to senior citizens. So in that case, whether this modeling part will whatever we are doing, will it be useful in such a
No.
scenario? That is for a short period of time.
Yep. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. The the issue was sound quality, and I appreciate the help that you gave me. Look, models, they only work to a certain extent. And when it comes to that level of extreme densities that you're talking about, the extremely packed train station, I don't think any model works well. That is too far dense for any model to simulate properly. Even my model would struggle. The key is just to not get to that level of density. Okay, if people are going to opposite directions, remember when I said that crowd crush would require of 8 or 9 people per square meter? When people are going in opposite directions, then crowd crush can happen at lower density levels, and that is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Different direction intention for people would create a higher level of pressure, and that level of density should be avoided at all costs, regardless of modeling or not. If the operation is showing that on a daily basis it's happening, models would not help.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I think there is no other questions.
Now, I would like to invite Dr. Remisha TV, Junior Scientist NATPAC, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed a great honor and privilege for me to deliver the vote of thanks for today's enlightening technical talk on progress in crowd science, a dissenting voice. First and foremost, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Milad Haghani for sharing his deep expertise with us. Your engaging talk has greatly enhanced our understanding of this important growing field and highlighting the need for improved risk models and management strategies that prioritize safety and human factors in the field of crowd science. A special thanks to our director, Sir Dr. K.P. Sudhir, for his constant guidance and support, without which this event would not have taken the wonderful shape it did. I would also like to sincerely thank all the participants for the active engagement throughout the session. Finally, a big thanks to the entire NATPAC team for their efforts behind the scenes in planning and organizing this session so smoothly. As we conclude, let us carry forward the insights we have gained today and let them inspire us towards greater research, innovation, and excellence in the field of crowd planning and crowd science. Once again, thank you all for making this event a resounding success. We look forward to hosting much more enlightening sessions in the future. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. And it was a pleasure being with you. Hopefully, I get to see you at the Crowd Safety Summit in 2027 in Bangalore.
Thank you, Professor. And also, it will be nice if you could inform us about your visit to this part of India. Actually, we would like to host you, if it is possible, in Kerala also, along with
Of course,
your.
if from now and 2027 an opportunity arises to visit India, I will make sure to contact you and also arrange a visit to Kerala and to your wonderful institute. That would absolutely be my priority.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Have a lovely day, everybody. And again, thank you for the invitation. I hope it was worth your time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
I don't know.